I admit that my tone is hard and grim. The struggle of my life has always been hard and grim. My tone is frank and open. I am no lawyer appearing before this court in a mere way of his profession. I am defending myself, an accused communist. I am defending my political honor, my honor as a revolutionary. I'm defending my communist ideology, my ideals. I'm defending the content and significance of my whole life. For these reasons, every word which I say in this court is part of me. Each phrase is the expression of my deep indignation against the unjust accusation, against the putting of this anti-communist crime, the burning of the Reichstag, to the account of the communists. These words were said in 1933 in front of a Nazi-run court by the Bulgarian communist Georgi Dimitrov. He was there not just defending himself against the trumped-up charges that he was involved in the Reichstag fire, but in defense of communism itself, and he won. Welcome to Collective Re-Education's series Ghosts of Revolution. In this episode, we look at the life and works of communist, anti-fascist, revolutionary Prime Minister Georgi Dimitrov.
Dimitrov is the living embodiment of praxis. From a youth, just a young child, he dropped out of school, I believe at 12 or 13, and he went to work in the printer's trade, which exposed him to the class struggle because there were many people involved in that line of work in union organizing and in the workers' movement. And so he began working in the printer's trade at that young age, and right away he began organizing and leading within the union movement, organizing strikes, and being involved as an organizer.
By 1900, at the age of 18, Georgi becomes the secretary of his apprentice printers union, and by 1902 joins the Social Democratic Party of Bulgaria. He participates in and leads several strikes, such as the June 18, 1906 miners' strike of Pernik, where the workers were demanding the right to set up their own trade unions, among other demands. The strike was well supported nationwide by the workers and lasted 35 days. The results being the founding of the Miners' Trade Union in Bulgaria. So he was young when he was doing this stuff.
Yeah, very young. He was remarkable, and that commitment stayed with him until his death. He went from being a young printers trade union worker union organizer to the first communist leader of Bulgaria.
Yeah.
He served on the Comintern. So it's Joseph Stalin. So you see a lifelong commitment from him starting at that, real early age.
In 1913, after Bulgaria's defeat in the Balkan Wars, 17 deputies were elected from Dimitrov's party, he being one of them. At just 31 years old, Georgi was the youngest member of the Bulgarian parliament. When the First World War was rolling out, Dimitrov held strong to his policy of remaining neutral in that imperialist war. In 1915, when Bulgaria entered the war, his party published opposition to the decree of mobilization and Bulgarian nationalism, resulting in Dimitrov being arrested. Between 1915 and 1917, he is held for just short periods of time, but in 1917, he was charged with mutiny and was stripped of his parliamentary immunity and spent a year and a half in prison.
Dimitrov, he wasn't the lonely revolutionary in his family like so many of us, I feel like, suffer from. Many of his family and in-laws were also revolutionaries. He lost a brother in the revolutionary struggle, and many of his sisters and the people that they married were revolutionary workers, and some were also directly involved in the printers' trade movement, which you can see, that there's a lot of people within that, within the print trade movement that became revolutionaries.
In 1919, still under Dimitar Blagoev's leadership, the party changes its name to the Communist Party of Bulgaria, and they apply to the Communist International. Georgi Dimitrov attends the Third Congress of the Comintern in Moscow in 1921.
By I think it's 23, he's leading the first, or one of the first. If you Google the first anti-fascist uprising in history, you'll come up with two: the Labin Republic in Croatia in 1921, and you'll come up with the one that Georgi Dimitrov helped organize and lead in Bulgaria in 1923. Yeah. And so they're both accredited for being the first anti-fascist uprising in history, defining what fascism is in real time. Yeah. They were defining it as fascism was defining itself, essentially, and breaking it down, and not just telling us what it is, but how to fight it, and how to stop it.
In June of 1923, the Mussolini-backed army led by fascist politician Zankov successfully overthrew the sitting Prime Minister Stambolijski of the Agrarian Party. The September uprising of the Bulgarian Communists happened later that year in opposition to the fascist Zankov government. After the failed 1923 uprising, Communist leaders Dimitrov and Kolarov fled through Yugoslavia to get to the Soviet Union. In 1926, with Bulgaria still under the same party rule as Zankov, Kolarov and Dimitrov are sentenced to death in absentia. In 1929, Dimitrov is sent to do Comintern work in Germany. Like that.
Well, at that point, he's essentially laying low. He has not just one, but two death sentences in Bulgaria at this time hanging over his head. One from activity that he did not participate in at all, and then one that he did, the September uprising. And so the other charge was basically what we would call it today terrorism, and so he didn't participate in it. We wouldn't call it terrorism, but that's how it would be defined. Yeah. And so he had those two sentences hanging over his head, and he was laying low and still participating in examining and giving opinions on world events, but was living in with a fake name in Germany, and that's when the Nazis essentially scoop him up, and three other communists, and then Marinus van der Lubbe, which you can decide whether or not he's an anarchist or a communist or just politically confused.
In Dimitrov's remark on the sentence, he points to who he thinks helped Lubbe start the fire, and many historians agree. If van der Lubbe had had accomplices, and if these were neither Torgler nor the other accused persons, then what? The question then comes up, why, in the course of 5 months of preliminary inquest and 3 months of court sessions, were the real accomplices not discovered? And what is more, these accomplices must have been insiders. That is, persons familiar with the distribution and inside structure of the Reichstag. Otherwise, van der Lubbe could not have perpetrated the fire. But who, apart from the National Socialists, could have known these things at the time? Who could, at the time when the communists were under strict observation and persecuted, calmly and unhindered enter and leave the Reichstag?
And yeah, they're charged with the Reichstag fire, which is the burning of the German parliament, which is what the Nazis would use to secure dictatorial powers. And also they told the public that this was the German Communist Party calling for revolution. So they used that as justification to go and to lock up, shut down, arrest, communists, socialists, and workers. And also begin which would lead to the shutting down of strikes and all of the other horrors to come, honestly. But yeah, they scooped him up and they charged him. And it wasn't just charging these 5 defendants. The Nazis were charging communism. And that's what Georgi Dimitrov so successfully defended was not just himself and his compatriots, but he defended in a Nazi courtroom and a worldwide audience. It was filled with media. He defended communism to the worldwide audience incredibly successfully.
And he did it himself. He acted as his own defense. He did not use a lawyer. An attendee of the Leipzig trial, the U.S. attorney and co-founder of the American Civil Liberties Union, Arthur Garfield Hayes, wrote in his autobiography, "I have never seen such a magnificent exhibition of moral courage. The man was not only brave, but reckless and selflessly so. Whenever he got to his feet, he would, by force of his personality, place the court, the prosecutors, the German audience, and the Nazis on the defensive." Yeah, he was forced to be reckoned with, I guess. So
yes, and if you're ever looking for somebody to gain revolutionary optimism from, or understand what revolutionary optimism is, look at Georgi Dimitrov. He was sitting in a Nazi prison, shackled for months. They took away his glasses. He wrote still daily, took notes. He wrote to the magistrate while shackled. He was being tortured. And while he was there, his wife took her own life. Yeah. The emotional weight of that, the psychological weight of all of that, I mean, that would crush most people, but not Georgi Dimitrov. No, he went on the offensive. He wrote the magistrate and said, enough is enough. Give me my glasses. Take off these shackles. He didn't not have defense by his own terms. He kept putting forth lawyers. How about this lawyer? They said, nope. How about this lawyer? Nope. And so he could not secure. They would not allow him to secure defense. And that was a large problem for a lot of them, because the whole lot of them, because also in Germany at the time, who wants to be the lawyer that's defending the communist? Well, the Nazis are in charge. It was a very obviously a sticky situation.
It's kind of like it's not justice. There's no justice in there.
Yes. Well, he was he gained himself victory. All 4 communists got off. Marinus van der Lubbe. He was found guilty and lost his life. The Nazis killed him. He was the sole person to take the blame for the Reichstag in the end. Though history has absolved him, and we know for a fact that he may have been involved, but the Nazis themselves were the ones who carried out the Reichstag fire. And like what you were saying about how, so he's sitting there and Bulgaria stripped him of his citizenship. So they couldn't send him, they couldn't deport him. And so the USSR, they gave him citizenship. And so then he could be deported there. And so the USSR came in a pinch, and, I'm not sure what would have happened to him. The Nazis had him in their clutches and they didn't want to let him go.
Since he was exiled from his home country, Dimitrov is welcomed to the Soviet Union. In April 1934, he is appointed a member of the Executive of Comintern, and in 1935, he is elected the Comintern's General Secretary, a position he holds until the office is dissolved in 1943. You have your handle was Reed Dimitrov for a reason, right? Because he, like you said in the beginning, and the most important thing, people say to me, you don't understand fascism. I'm like, no, I do. I actually have studied fascism because I have read people like Togliatti and Dimitrov and Dutt and Zitkin and all that. This is what I do. And so maybe it's you that you don't understand it. I think I understand it pretty well.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
yeah. So like, in doing this, like it's just like, these are the people where you need to learn about fascism, like Dimitrov's where you go. Like he's totally going to he totally describes it well. He totally tells you how to fight it, and those are the important things, because he's not just saying, oh, fascism, this is what fascism is. He's actually
Right.
giving you solutions towards it.
And it's very concise and specific, whereas many people, when they're talking about fascism, it's very vague. Like Umberto Eco's 14 characteristics of fascism. Those could describe a colonialist government, a feudalist government, a society, or whatever. It could describe so many things other than fascism. Whereas when you look at, when you get into those names that you just mentioned, Dimitrov, Zetkin, Togliatti, they get very specific and concise when analyzing it and talking about it. And Dimitrov can do it all in about 20 pages or less. The fascist defensive piece is so short.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, it is very important, especially now. I mean, all we're doing is fighting fascism. I mean, I have my thing, like I equate neoliberalism as like the new form of fascism, in that it's like an international, instead of like having the national aspects of it, it's like an international fascism. Like it spreads throughout the world and stuff like that. Like it's not just stuck in borders. And so it is important, like, because when you can understand fascism, you can actually understand what is going on in the United States today. You know what I mean? Like you see it like so clearly that the liberals and the conservatives, I mean, they're all liberals, but they're all just acting on this fascism that's there in the system that can be tapped into because of the other systems that we have at play right now. Like fascism needs something like a capitalism, because fascism, comes out of like imperialism, and like as capitalism is decaying, then we get these more violent systems coming to head with it, like coming out from it. So yeah.
Right.
So,
and also it as the system's decaying, and also as the workers' movements are rising, it becomes the counter to that rise. It becomes the counter revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is partly why it has to be so completely violent.
Yeah. Yep. Do you want to read from the diary, or do you want to read from the fascism stuff first?
Sure.
Your choice.
Well, since we're on to the fascist topic, we might as well stick with that. My copy of the Fascist Offensive I gave away, but it's also inside of this book, The United Front.
Yes.
It also contains it, so I'll go to that because I can't read and look at the screen here on the phone. Maybe the part where he's describing like what fascism is. That's the juicy part, I guess. Georgi Dimitrov says in The Fascist Offensive and the Task of the International Proletariat, defining fascism, he says, fascism is not a form of state power standing above both classes, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, as Otto Bauer, for instance, has asserted. It is not the revolt of the petty bourgeoisie, which has captured the machinery of the state, as the British socialist Brailsford declares. No, fascism is not a power standing above class, nor government of the petty bourgeoisie or the lumpen proletariat over finance capital. Fascism is the power of finance capital itself. It is the organization of terrorist vengeance against the working class and the revolutionary section of the peasantry and intelligentsia. In foreign policy, fascism is jingoism in its most brutal form, fomenting bestial hatred of other nations. The fundamental, the most decisive thing in establishing an anti-fascist People's Front is resolute action of the revolutionary proletariat in defense of the demands of these sections of the people, particularly the working peasantry, demands in line with the basic interests of the proletariat, and in the process of struggle, combining the demands of the working class with these demands. In forming an anti-fascist People's Front, a correct approach to those organizations and parties whose membership compromises a considerable number of the working peasantry and the mass of the urban petty bourgeoisie is of great importance. In the capitalist countries, the majority of these parties and organizations, political as well as economic, are still under the influence of the bourgeoisie and follow it. The social composition of these parties and organizations is heterogeneous. They include rich peasants side by side with landless peasants, big businessmen alongside petty shopkeepers. But control is in the hands of the former, the agents of big capital. This obliges us to approach the different organizations in different ways, remembering that often the bulk of the membership ignores the real political character of its leadership. Under certain conditions, we can and must try to draw these parties and organizations or certain sections of them to the side of the anti-fascist People's Front, despite their bourgeois leadership. Such, for instance, is today the situation in France with the Radical Party, in the United States with various farmers' organizations, in Poland with the Stronach Ludow, in Yugoslavia with the Croatian Peasants' Party, in Bulgaria with the Agrarian Union, in Greece with the Agrarians, etc. But regardless of whether or not there is any chance of attracting these parties and organizations as a whole to the People's Front, our tactics must, under all circumstances, be directed towards drawing the small peasants, artisans, handicraftsmen, etc., among their members into an anti-fascist People's Front. Hence, you see that in this field, we must, along the line, put an end to what has not infrequently occurred in our work neglect or contempt of the various organizations and parties of the peasants, artisans, and the mass of petty bourgeoisie in the towns. Dimitrov was very much in favor of never abandoning workers as a whole. So if he was talking about anarchists, he would say, well, just think about them as a different sector of workers. And he doesn't mean think of anarchism, the ideology itself, as just another workers' ideology. No, he's not like dismissing it in that way. He's just saying, don't abandon the anarchists. Don't forget them. and in terms of like is People's Front, and there's other variations of the United Front that he covers, and at times there's more sectarian rules where sometimes the United Front that you're developing is only anti-capitalist, and then sometimes you're developing a more broad, and that's why they use the word peoples in it, a People's Front, to be a little bit more broad, a little more encompassing, because sometimes you're trying to draw and to reach a broader mass. We can't always only focus on, class conscious workers or just union workers, etc. We have to, start reaching out more with wider nets. And he's very much never in favor of abandoning workers. And he'll talk about like, even if the country succumbs to fascism, if your country succumbs to it, you don't walk away and say, well, I'm not going to organize anymore. You go to where the workers are. If there's only fascist organizations, then he actually advises people to go to those organizations, not to change it from the inside, but to quite literally reach those workers that you can reach, because that's where they're at.
Yeah, Lenin says pretty much the same thing. Did you want to do one more little read? Did you want to read anything from his diary or anything? And
I've got a couple of spots. Let's see here. There's how about that the toast about the middle cadre?
That sounds excellent.
There's a part in there that I like because it shows how we tend to forget to talk about the mistakes that our idols make. And in his diary, we get to see live time them talking about some of the mistakes that they made. And in one part, it's super interesting because Stalin and Dimitrov and the Comintern essentially gave Mao directives. They said, this is what you should do. And Mao did not do what they said to do because he didn't have to. It's advice, and more than directives, I guess. But he didn't do it, and it worked out in favor. They won the battles, and it was it ended up being the right thing to do. And that also leads into the dissolvement of the Comintern, which Dimitrov was there for and writes about in his diary, and a part of the reason why the Comintern was dissolved was because those on the ground in different respective countries better know the conditions that they should struggle in than people from across the ocean. And that was one of those lessons that they learned from to be able to come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's real neat to see that, in his diary. But here he talks about, Dimitrov says, and to the one who inspires them, shows them the way, and leads them, to Comrade Stalin. Stalin says, no, the main thing is the middle cadre. Generals can do nothing without a good officer corps. Why did we prevail over Trotsky and the rest? Trotsky, as we know, was the most popular man in our country after Lenin. Bukharin, Zinoviev, Rykov, Tomsky were all popular. We were little known. I myself, Molotov, Vorshilov, and Kalinin, then, we were field workers in Lenin's time, his colleagues. But the middle cadres supported us, explained our positions to the masses. Meanwhile, Trotsky completely ignored those cadres. Dimitrov. And because after Lenin, you showed us the true path and carried on his cause firmly and wisely. After all, there have been cases in history where successors have ruined the causes of their precursors. Vorshilov and Molotov. Dimitrov wants to propose a toast. Dimitrov. There's nothing I can add to what Comrade Stalin has said about a merciless struggle against enemies and about the significance of the middle cadre. That will be taken into account in the party, and I myself will do everything in my power to ensure that it is taken into account in the ranks of the Comintern as well. But I should say that it is not only my profound conviction, but I experienced for myself in prison under conditions of the most severe ordeals what extremely good fortune it is for the socialist revolution and for this international proletariat that following Lenin, Comrade Stalin has carried on his cause with such unswervingness and genius through every sharp turning point and has ensured the victory of our cause. There can be no speaking of Lenin without linking him with Stalin. All lift their glasses and cheers. Stalin says, I respect Comrade Dimitrov very much. We are friends and will remain friends. But I must disagree with him. He has expressed himself here in an un-Marxist fashion. What the victory of the cause requires is the correct conditions, and then the leaders will always be found. It is not enough merely to point out the true path. The English party, after all, has what we consider the correct policy, but it can accomplish nothing because the middle cadre are on the side of the laborites. The French party is carrying out the correct policy, but the Socialist Party is nevertheless very strong. The fundamental thing is the middle cadres. That must be noted, and it must never be forgotten. That other conditions being equal, the middle cadres decide the outcome of our cause. And that is from, June 17th, 1937.
In 1946, Bulgaria abolishes its monarchy and is declared a people's republic. After 22 years in exile, Georgi Dimitrov finally heads home and wins the election of prime minister a few months later. He becomes the first communist leader of Bulgaria. The Dimitrov Constitution, which was modeled after the 1936 Soviet Constitution, is accepted into law in 1947 and remained so until 1971.
I know that he focused a lot on youth and on creating, a lot of what we see in a lot of the other socialist countries, as far as having women's groups and mass orgs and youth, and various mass groups involved in the government, and so I know that he was doing things similar to that, but I tend to kind of fall off from him. He falls off my radar at that period.
The youth stuff probably comes from, like, he got started so young, you know what I mean? Like, it probably, like, that was probably important for him, and he wanted people to understand it at a younger age, like, be more involved and just be fighting and cognitive of these the fascism that could happen and stuff like that. So that's probably, I can see him definitely pushing for the youth and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, so many speeches and so many. There's one book that's of his collection of stuff. It's called For Youth, and I mean, he just felt so much, and like you said, because he became a fighter for the working class, at such a young age, that he probably definitely felt a responsibility to help ensure the next generation also follow in those kind of footsteps.